So, Skrulls are the bad guys. And you're a Kree, a race of noble warriors.
Heroes. Noble warrior heroes.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 198. Out now in cinemas is Captain Marvel, the latest film from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It has broken all kinds of box office records and received mostly positive reviews from film critics. However, there is a controversy surrounding the superhero movie, with a very vocal segment criticising the film star Brie Larson for some very controversial comments, and the mainstream media censoring dissenting voices from bringing those comments to light. Joining me today to talk about this issue and other things as well is film critic from SocietyReviews.com, Jacob Smith. Jacob, I thank you very much for joining me today.
No problem, Matt. Glad to be here.
So let's start off talking about our opinions on the film itself, Captain Marvel. I think you and I are coming from different perspectives in regards to the quality of the film. Jacob, how about you go first? Tell me, what did you think of the film when you saw it?
So pretty much, for me with a lot of Marvel movies, I haven't been too enthusiastic about Marvel movies recently. I think I've given maybe like the last 4 or 5 that I can remember, probably around the same rating. I think about 3 out of 5. So when I saw this movie, taking all the extracurricular stuff aside for a second, just talking about the movie, when I saw the movie, I was pretty much expecting it to be much of the same, and it kind of was for the most part. I think it was a little bit more of a letdown in some areas, but for me personally, this is probably closer to, I think, like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which I wasn't a huge fan of. I think there was a big drop-off with that one, but as far as like a superhero movie goes, I really did like the first act of the film, which is, a lot of people who talked about the film said that they actually didn't like that part of the film. But for me, it was like, watching a character who, we haven't technically been introduced with. I thought that was a much better the way to kind of establish your character. I think what happened was that when the film got towards like the second half, where she goes into, or she falls down into Earth, and then, she meets up with Samuel L. Jackson, I think they kind of went a much different direction than they should have gone in. So that's why you have a lot of people complaining about just the overall narrative and stuff like that. But for the most part, for me, it was just a basic run of the mill MCU film. If I had to give it an overall grade, I probably would give it somewhere like a 2 out of 5. Like I said, probably just in terms of quality, I think it matches more up with something like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It's not like the worst Marvel movie out there, but it's not the best either. So,
my grades wise, I'll give it myself a 3.5 out of 5. You are correct in that when it comes to the critical opinion, a lot of people were saying first part is kind of sluggish and it picks up in the second half, and that's where I come from it as well. I find sometimes with movies like this, anything to do with sci-fi or fantasy or something, if you're going to start a movie in a whole new world and you're doing this world building kind of thing, when you have all these different new elements, kind of funny character names, different setting, a lot of exposition, it can be real clunky, it can be a little sluggish at the start of a movie, and that's what I felt with Captain Marvel. For me, it's really starting to hit, the film started to hit its stride once they were on Earth. I think the character as well of Captain Marvel, or Carol Danvers, as she's come to be known later on in the film, and I try not to give anyway too spoilers to anyone listening out there. I think her character herself kind of you warm up to her a bit, which isn't easy because I think the character it comes across as kind of very kind of stiff and very stubborn and such, and those type of characters aren't the most relatable. But as the film progresses, I think she warms up a bit. I thought that Ben Mendelsohn did a really good job as the Skrull. I was just going to say villain now because I don't want to give away too much as well in regards to his character development. I thought he was terrific in it. Samuel Jackson seemed to have fun with a character that usually is very kind of tightly wound. There's a lot of fun happening there, and I think the last half an hour of the film, especially for me, really kind of just let go of whatever kind of restrictions they had and just went all for it, and I really dug that as well. So at the start of the film, I wasn't so much into it. It warmed me up a bit in the middle. By the end, I liked it quite a bit. In regards to the whole MCU kind of canon, I'm going to put it a little bit under the middle, kind of closer. I feel like myself, I actually found it kind of reminded me a little bit of the first Thor movie. Kind of similar. You had like a godlike character who comes to Earth, finds his or her identity, and then at the end you got the big kind of spectacle kind of thing. I did like the Thor movie much better though, because Chris Hemsworth is a much more personable actor, and Thor's a much more personable character compared to what Brie Larson is and what she did with the Captain Marvel character. I'm not saying that she did a bad performance, but I think future films with Captain Marvel are going to be much more enjoyable, because this one being with the type of character development that it had, it was kind of hard to try to get into the whole kind of like headspace of where this character was coming from. But that's not really what I want to talk about. I like that we got that up aside, but let's talk about the whole kind of controversy surrounding Captain Marvel, the debate that's happening especially online on Twitter and YouTube and etc. So when it came to this movie specifically, and the issues that you have towards it, and other people have towards it as well, Jacob, when was the first kind of thing that really kind of had that you responded to in regards to, wait a minute, there's something more happening here and we need to talk about it?
Yeah, and it's important to kind of explain like how we got here, because I think one of the big things about this whole situation is that a lot of people kind of took like the media's narrative of like how we got to this point, and a lot of that stuff that was being said wasn't exactly true. So I just wanted to go ahead and just like kind of clear things up, so like we'll have a better understanding of what happened.
Absolutely.
So this all really started about, I'd say about 8 months ago, because this was a story that broke like last summer, and it was Brie Larson, and she was at an event. I don't remember the exact event that she was at, but I believe it was something honoring women in Hollywood or something toward that sort. And she was discussing the film A Wrinkle in Time. Now, during the speech, it was basically when she gave the speech saying that, she didn't want to hear a 40-year-old white dude's opinion about a movie that wasn't made for them. Speaking in regards of A Wrinkle in Time. Now, yes. The point she was trying to make at the time was basically saying that, she felt like the movie got a bad rap because, the people who the movie was made for didn't get to review it. So it kind of got buried before, it got to its target audience, so to speak, right? But the problem with that whole thing is that if you remember A Wrinkle in Time, that was a film that was a huge bomb for Disney. I think it lost somewhere like near $150, $200 million. And it was pretty much panned by everybody. Like, it wasn't just, a certain demographic of critics. I mean, critics and audiences hated the movie. I think if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, it's somewhere like below 30% between both audiences and critics. So it was a movie that people saw, they weren't interested in. It didn't really get any buzz whatsoever. So that was really the first step of how this whole controversy steamrolled, was those comments. Because she kind of, like a lot of people tried to like clarify what she was trying to say. I think for the most part, like the way that she said it just came off very like condescending and off-putting to a lot of people. But like I said, that was so long ago. People weren't really like too hot about that, because after a while, people eventually forgot about it. And then going back to about a month ago, IndieWire had wrote an article, and I believe it was another interview that Brie Larson did. Now, this is actually going into Captain Marvel now, so that was kind of an isolated incident, but this is going into the actual promotion for Captain Marvel. So IndieWire wrote an article entitled Brie Larson isn't letting her Captain Marvel press tour be overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. So this is kind of where, the whole, the wheels started turning for this, because essentially the way that, the IndieWire portrayed it is that Brie Larson didn't want, basically a bunch of white guys interviewing her for her press tour for the movie. So you put those comments on top of the comments that she had made like months prior, and then you started getting the ball rolling and people being upset about Brie Larson and the things that she was saying. And then people were saying that, well, if she doesn't want to hear an opinion about, a white dude voicing their opinion about movies, and she doesn't want, white dudes, interviewing her for, her press tour, and clearly she doesn't want white dudes to to will basically watch her movie, right? And that's kind of like where the fire like really started about, the comments that she made and then all the online videos and stuff like that. So, and then this kind of leads us into what happened with Rotten Tomatoes. So with Rotten Tomatoes, the whole situation that happened here, there was a whole lot of misinformation going on about exactly what happened. Basically, for those who are familiar with Rotten Tomatoes, at least know what it was before the recent change. There was a feature on Rotten Tomatoes where you can go online and you can basically say for any future movie, it didn't matter what it was, you can go there and you can say, I'm interested in seeing this movie or I'm not interested in seeing this movie. You can put whatever reason you want on there, for why you don't want to go see it or why you do want to go see it. So a bunch of people online went to Rotten Tomatoes and they start going to the not interested and leaving comments about why they weren't interested in watching the movie. And pretty much about a good 90% of them are all about, Brie Larson and the comments that she made over the last few months. So the media picked up on this, and they started reporting this as people were review bombing the movie. So when you say review bombing, it makes people assume that people were going to Rotten Tomatoes and leaving fake reviews about a movie that they hadn't seen yet, which wasn't the case. It was basically people going on there saying that they didn't want to go see the movie because Brie Larson said this, this, and that. So the score for the interested, not interested rating had dropped somewhere to, I believe, like 27% by the time that, actually, if you recall, by the time the media had reported on this, the interest rating was only 72%. So it was like towards like the lower tier for movies, but it wasn't anything like really alarming. But once the media really started picking up on it, that number went from 72% to 27%. So when it went down to 27%, that's when Rotten Tomatoes came in, and they pretty much put like, a stop to it. They said that, you weren't allowed to leave, any comments about future movies anymore. They completely changed their whole system. The media picked up on it. They started calling like everyone trolls, saying that, there was trolls review bombing the whole thing. So of course, the people who, felt, legitimately bothered or annoyed by the comments that, Brie Larson made, they started getting called trolls throughout the media, which only makes the situation worse. And then all of a sudden we have, the what we had happen this weekend with the Rotten Tomatoes scores and reviews. So I don't know if you want to jump in and kind of like talk about the whole situation from your perspective, but that's basically what led us up to a few months ago to basically the week of the release for the movie.
I remember when Brie Larson first made those comments, and I just had a look up here as to when she did it. So she was presented an award. It was called the Women in Film Crystal and Lucy Awards. And you're absolutely right. Like, she went up there and she mentioned A Wrinkle in Time, which was a movie. I think it had Oprah Winfrey, it had Chris Pine. It was directed by Ava DuVernay. It was based on a pretty popular kind of like young adult children's kind of novel. It did bomb. Yeah. I mean, it went nowhere, and the critical reaction to it was negative as well. And I remember when she made the comments, in the subsequent comment that she made as well in regards to the Captain Marvel press junket, where, and I think a big problem with this whole thing is when it comes to Brie Larson, as I mentioned before, in regards to, she's not a very personable person in that she comes across really harsh in the way that she brings about her opinion and such. Now, some people might say, power to that, but in my opinion, if you're going to come across and kind of like lambast a whole segment of a film audience, there's going to be repercussions from that. And a lot of people are going to get pissed off, and I was as well. I myself don't like to hear people say a certain film should only be seen by a certain audience or should only be critiqued by a certain person depending on their race, their sex, their creed, whatever. Because call me old-fashioned, but I subscribe to the Martin Luther King proclamation that all people are created equal, and I also believe that all films are made for everyone. And that's a very important thing that people kind of missing out here. There's a certain segregation that's happening within film society whatsoever. It's actually being sponsored by the media and certain acting personalities and filmmakers. They're saying only certain people should see this or react to that. I think that is just bogus and very kind of destructive in a sort of way. We should all come together to watch films and react to it as we are as people, not as we are as types. And I think that's a very kind of important thing to come forward with. Having said that, though, even though I had had a reaction towards Brie Larson and what she'd said and how she said it, I try to go into any movies really, in Captain Marvel specifically, thinking to myself, I'm here to see what she does as a performance, what the movie's like, and try to keep that stuff to the wayside. And Jacob, I'm sure you do the same as well. And so I was pleasantly surprised to find that at the end of it, I was cool with the movie. I don't have to like Brie Larson, its comments or how she comes across as a person, but the movie itself I was cool with. But it kind of comes back to a certain issue I have sometimes when it comes to watching films and watching movies. Jacob, don't we think sometimes that when it comes to actors or directors, they're sometimes going to do stupid shit, they're going to say stupid things? Shouldn't we leave that to the wayside and see the movie on its own merits?
Well, yeah, and that's the conversation that I've had a lot with a lot of people because obviously I run a review site. The majority of my audience are people who identify with either conservative or libertarian or right-leaning, whatever the case may be.
Yep.
So we always have this conversation about the artist versus the art. Like, can you separate the art from the artist? And I can't speak for a lot of other people, but my model has always been is that look, I'm not going to boycott or say that I'm not going to support somebody's project, wherever the case may be, just because they have a different viewpoint than me. Like, because for me especially, if I just say that I'm not going to watch somebody's movie because they voted for Hillary Clinton, well, guess what? I'm not going to be watching a whole lot of movies. Like, I'm pretty much going to be taking that whole part of my job right out of the window as far as that goes. So it's like, as far as that aspect of it, is like I don't really pay too much attention to it. Like, I understand when you're dealing with Hollywood, the majority of people are liberal, and that's kind of the way that it is. I think when you get to a certain point with some people, because you have people, in Hollywood who are left-leaning, and that's fine. But then you have the very vocal ones. And with the very vocal ones, you have to, ask yourself or tell yourself, like, and at what point do I just kind of ignore anything that they say, or do I just take personal offense to stuff that they say? Now, for a good example was a couple of years ago, Michael Shannon, who I'm pretty sure most of you guys know, he played Zod in Man of Steel. He's been in a whole bunch of movies. I'm pretty sure if you saw his face, you know exactly who the guy is.
Yep.
He made some pretty inflammatory comments a couple of years ago. This was like right after the election. And he was really upset that Donald Trump had won the election. He was basically going, I'm paraphrasing here, basically saying that, if you had any family members that voted for Trump, then, disown them because, they're no longer, like, part of your family, like, stuff like that. It's, like, really, like, inflammatory stuff. So it's, like, it is different for, like, some people, because I asked this question on my site. It's, like, at what point do you say, okay, I can separate the art from the artist, to the point where you can just say, okay, you know what? This guy has said way too much stuff against me personally that I just can't, I can't even in the realm of like a movie or a TV show, I just can't enjoy his work because, when I look at him on screen, all I can think about is how the guy really feels about people who, who are on my political side of the fence, and it just takes me too far out of it. Now, I know, like, with Captain Marvel, I think Brie Larson, for the most part, did a really good job with this film. I think part of it was like I kind of had really low expectations for, especially for the trailer. And I'll say this. I don't know who edited that trailer, the very first trailer for Captain Marvel, but they made her seem like the most boring, monotone person that I've ever seen in my entire life in that trailer. But then when you watch the movie, like, she does have, like, personality. Like, she's not just, like, pouty face and, like, non-speaking like they show in the trailer. Like, she does a pretty good job in the movie. But it's like the way that they portrayed her, in that trailer made it seem like the movie is going to be a completely different thing than what it actually was when you saw it yourself. So the overall thing about, like I said, the art from the artist is like, guys like the MCU in general, guys like Chris Evans, they've said some pretty crazy stuff, but nothing too crazy to us. Like, okay, I can't watch like a Captain America like movie like anymore. It's something like that. But if you look at guys like and I just wrote about this earlier today. Samuel L. Jackson came out with some pretty fiery comments in an Esquire interview. Basically, he said that he hates Trump, he hates Mitch McConnell, who's the Republican Senate Majority Leader, and he basically says that he doesn't care who gets mad about his comments. If you want to boycott, he's already gotten paid, and he doesn't care. And he says some pretty, let's just say, some more harsh language was used because Samuel L. Jackson. So what do you expect?
Yeah.
So the comparatively, something to like what he said today compared to like what stuff that Brie Larson has gotten in trouble over for the last few months. Stuff that Brie Larson said was nowhere nearly as inflammatory as the stuff that Samuel L. Jackson said. So I think for the most part, it's kind of just more of like a personal choice. Like at what point are you comfortable with, supporting somebody in their work when certain people are like, hey, if you don't like what I have to say, then, F off. And then you have to make that decision on your own.
It's always an interesting internal debate when it comes to that. Who would you support in regards to putting money towards a person's product, whether it be a musician or an actor? And it's always an interesting thing to me. For example, I'm a big fan of Mel Gibson. I love his acting, I love his movies. But, the stuff that he's done in the past, it's something that always sticks in the back of your head. But I always try my best to separate the art from the artist. You mentioned before Chris Evans in regards to the MCU League of Actors and some of the stuff they say. Mark Ruffalo, I think you could put in that boat. Don Cheadle as well. In fact, if I don't remember... If I don't remember, just before the past election, wasn't there I'm not sure if it was an election or the primaries, I'm not sure, but wasn't there actually an ad from majority of the people from the MCU, and it was directed by Joss Whedon, and it didn't pretty much come out as so, but it's pretty much saying don't vote for Trump because of so and so and so and so. Am I correct about this?
Oh no, you're absolutely right. I think this was like right after Trump had won the Republican nomination. That like about a couple of months before the election, and it was Scarlett Johansson, Robert Downey Jr., Josh Whedon, obviously Mark Ruffalo, Don Cheadle had all come out with this political ad, basically saying that don't vote for Trump. He's a racist, abusive idiot, and all kinds of stuff. So it was, like I said, about half of the cast of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in this ad. Essentially, very, polarizing, partisan, ad, basically saying, hey, don't vote for these guys because, we don't like these guys. So I'm pretty sure, a lot of people saw that, and you consider that to be, very off-putting too, because basically you're saying that, hey, if I like this guy and I voted for this guy, and you're trashing him, then you're kind of indirectly trashing me too because I voted for him.
Yeah.
And I believe there was another ad a few months back. This was before the midterms here in America, and I believe it was another one. It was Chris Evans, Chadwick Boseman, who plays Black Panther, Scarlett Johansson again. I'm not sure if Mark Ruffalo was in it. I think he might have been, but I'm not 100% certain. And it was basically the same thing. It wasn't as inflammatory as the other one, but they were with a whole bunch of left-wing liberal activists basically saying, vote for, the left-wing side again. So that one wasn't nearly as bad as the other one. So that one kind of flew under the radar where once again, it was the same cast of people, over again.
Yeah. I think it's important to say, though, that even though actors take political positions, this is a free country and they are free to do so, but at the same token, just as it is a free society and you or anyone else is free to say as a member of an audience, a person who loves cinema, that you're free to say also, well, I disagree with their opinion, but I also do not want to watch their film. And I think it's very important that we put that forward. It's people are free to react to these things as they wish. One narrative that's really come out of this whole Captain Marvel thing is the feminist perspective of it. Now, when I was watching the movie, I was waiting for this big kind of feminist statement to come forth, because from all indications of what a lot of the marketing has come forth, a lot what the media and Brie Larson especially has said, this was supposed to be some kind of big statement film about I don't know what. And all I saw was what in my opinion was a really good superhero movie where the lead just happened to be a female. It isn't this, to me, it wasn't a big kind of protest piece whatsoever. Because let's face it, this is a superhero movie. The whole point of it is to entertain, not so much to illuminate. Although I do think that with the whole Black Panther movie that came out last year and a lot of the political narrative wound into that, maybe Disney are tipping their tone more into that thing, but we're going to get back to that a little later. And a lot of people bring up Ghostbusters, the reboot that came out a couple of years ago, and the negative reaction that came towards that. I think on YouTube it is still the most disliked movie trailer that they got up there, if not the most disliked video. Because the reaction to that was swift. A lot of people didn't like the idea of, number one, rebooting it, and number two, rebooting it with female actors replacing the male actors. Now, you and I had a talk about this on Twitter a little bit, and I brought up the opinion that a lot of people had a problem with the movie based just on that the lead actors were replaced by women. Do you think there's any element whatsoever in any segment out there of people who are upset about Captain Marvel that they are upset with a perceived kind of feminist kind of perspective that's coming into play here?
Just regarding like Captain Marvel, or kind of like movies in general?
Let's just say Captain Marvel.
I can't say that. 'Cause you're talking about two like different things. Like one side is claiming that, you know, the fuel for the people being upset basically is about, you know, it's a female lead, and, you know, these guys just don't want, you know, a female lead. And I don't believe that that's true at all. Because, I mean, if it was just about, you know, a female lead and people were angry about being a female lead, then we would have essentially saw this exact same thing happen when Wonder Woman came out a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. But the big difference between Wonder Woman is that with Wonder Woman, you know, you're talking about an iconic character that's been around for decades, who's never gotten, you know, their own, like, you know, solo movie up to that point. Like, you know, everyone remembers the Linda Carter series. You know, there's been tons of cartoons, but we never actually got like a solo Wonder Woman movie. And then we finally got it. Now, the most I remember was when Gal Gadot was initially cast as Wonder Woman. There were people like, hey, is she really Wonder Woman though? Like, there's people questioning the casting, but it wasn't, you know, like people upset that, you know, they're pushing like a female movie or it's like a feminist movie, because and that's probably the big difference here, because there's a difference between just a movie that has a female lead and a feminist movie. Now, I agree with you 100%. When I saw Captain Marvel, outside of like a few like, you know, notes that I'm pretty sure like, you know, the screenwriters slipped in, it wasn't really like a big, you know, in-your-face feminist movie at all. And it's kind of weird, especially with the way like, you know, Brie Larson and a few of the other cast members were talking about it during the promotional tour, because you would have thought it would have been like that. But for the most part, you can watch like the first hour and you're thinking to yourself, well, I heard so much about how this is a feminist movie and it's going to push, you know, intersectionality and all this stuff, but I'm just not seeing it going in and stuff like that. So, you know, if we're just talking about, you know, a movie that has a female lead, I think most people are willing to give the benefit of the doubt as far as like, you know, is it going to be a quality movie? You know, is it going to be, you know, a good movie? People are more willing to see it if not. But if they hear that, you know, oh, this is going to be, you know, a feminist movie and they're going to be pushing this and that, which is a lot what they heard about, you know, Captain Marvel going in, so then they're going to think, okay, well, this movie's just going to be pushing an agenda, and, you know, an agenda that I particularly don't agree with, so I'm just going to like stay clear of it entirely. And I think that's kind of like the disconnect that you have. And a quick note about Ghostbusters. So we talked about this on Twitter, and I had mentioned that, you know, the backlash that I remember started when the trailer got downvoted or whatnot. And you said that you were like following the situation like earlier before then. The only thing that I remember like before the trailer thing blew up was that, you know, with Ghostbusters, it was a movie that a lot of people were, you know, waiting for like many years and whatnot. But, you know, it got to a point where, you know, they could never really get the original guys to come back and do it. I think there was a lot of issues with, like, Bill Murray. Like, he was kind of like one foot in, one foot out for a while. And they waited so long that, unfortunately, Harold Ramis died. Yeah. So then it became like, okay, well, now we're not going to get the original movie again. And like I said, I'm not 100% certain if he died before the production of Ghostbusters 2016 or afterwards. But I think it was shortly around that time where they announced they were going to do the all-females Ghostbusters. So if there was any backlash regarding to that, I think he'd be more up to speed about what happened there than I would be. Because I only remember when like I said, when news broke that the trailer was like the most disliked trailer in YouTube history, and that's kind of when I started paying attention to it. So I didn't know like what happened prior to that event.
Yeah, well, I think the thing with Ghostbusters, then like you were saying in regards to Wonder Woman versus Captain Marvel, Ghostbusters is already a very much situated pop product in the pop culture. There are things that went with it, certain personality, characters, etc. And of course, Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd being comedy legends. Everyone wanted to see those guys back. It didn't happen. There was a big rift between Harold Ramis and Bill Murray at the time. Bill Murray wanted to be killed off in the first act, which is funny because if you remember the reboot, they do actually kill off Bill Murray's character in that movie. Yeah. So it's always like he got his wish, right? So, so yeah, what I remember about that whole thing was that when it was announced it was going to be an all-female reboot, that's when a lot of people were like, well, hang on. Is this done because this is the right thing to go about it? Or is this done because there's some type of like PC kind of thing happening right now? Because about this time was 2016, so it was just like, to me, there's two pivotal things that happen in pop culture that ties in with American life, especially kind of political kind of stuff, over the last, say 20 years or so, that's had an effect on everything that's out there in movies right now. Post 9/11 and post-Trump presidency. And I think both of those things have made a kind of like a real kind of big ripple effect. Hell, I'd say a tsunami across all facets of life, especially pop culture and how it has reacted to, because as you and I both know, all entertainment industries, whether it be where you are in America, where I am in Australia, and a lot of other places as well, is very much ideologically driven by a left perspective than anything else. It's just how it kind of goes. I think it starts with back in universities and also in high schools with academics and teachers. It's just how it is, and I don't think it will ever change. So I think a lot of people get very suspicious whenever, like, casting news like that Ghostbusters one, which came out like, it was kind of like, real kind of 180, it just came out of nowhere. It got a lot of people off guard. I didn't care myself because I'm a big fan of all the people that was involved with it. I didn't like the movie. I thought the movie was terrible. And for not because of the people, not because of who was casting it, because it was just a poorly made movie. It had no stakes. I didn't like the special effects. The jokes didn't hit. It had kind of like all these side things. Dan Aykroyd making appearances. It's just all that stuff was just not necessary, and I really look forward to seeing what Jason Reitman does with the material, and that's going to be interesting to watch over the next couple of years.
There's a real quick point on that because I was actually more favorable to the movie than a lot of other people was. I didn't like it either. Like, it was like, to me, it was somewhere like around like the 2 out of 5 that I gave Captain Marvel. For me, like, I actually did kind of enjoy the movie up to a point. So then I thought, for a moment there, I was like, well, all the backlash for this movie is like, you guys are going to have to eat crow. This is actually at least a pretty solid film. And I think everything kind of fell apart towards that last act, the ending, the last 30 minutes. That's kind of where everything fell apart. And then I was like, okay, now I see why people were so angry about this film. It's like, yeah, I get it now.
Yeah, I remember watching it with a friend of mine, and neither of us had any bone to pick whatsoever of the casting. I liked Paul Feig as a director. I think he's really talented, and and then after all, I'm just like, this wasn't for me. And I think a lot of people came from the same perspective. But there is that kind of correlation there in some aspects, at least. Well, at least especially when it comes to social media reaction. So let's touch back on what you were talking about previously in regards to Rotten Tomatoes. So as you said before, Rotten Tomatoes have two main kind of like gauges on their things. So first is the kind of like the actual critic reviews. They tally it up, they make a percentage, they bring about whatever, if the film is fresh or whether it's rotten. Oh, and before I continue, I'm going to say that I am actually a Rotten Tomatoes proved critic, so my reviews are up there. So I'm coming from that perspective as well. And then you got the other gauges, which is the audience reaction. So the interesting thing that they used to have anyway, and I'm not sure, Jacob, did they remove the audience kind of like the audience participation aspect only from Captain Marvel or from all their films?
No, they removed it from every feature movie on the site. So basically, you used to be able to go on there before a movie came out and said you were interested or not interested in watching a movie. They completely removed that aspect from their entire site. So you can't do that for any movie. The only thing you can do now is that there's a button that says if you want to see a movie. It doesn't give you the option if you don't want to see a movie. It just says if you want to see a movie, press the button. And one of the things that I found out, I'm not sure if they changed this or not, but when you press the button, you can't unselect it. So if you like accidentally press the button, it's permanently stays on you want to see the movie, and you can't change it back. So yeah, they did that across the board for the entire site.
So when it comes to that thing in particular, I think the reaction tally before Rotten Tomatoes changed it was as down as maybe, 31%, 21% in regards to audience reaction. Was that about the number we're looking at?
Yeah, I think some people said it went lower than that. When I saw it, it was as low as 27% when I saw it. I think some people said it went down to as much as like 23%.
So I understand, like I said before, people have the freedom to choose how to want to express their opinion towards anything out there. I know I'm 100% towards that. You and I very much come from similar kind of ideological, kind of political. I'm a conservative person as well, in a lot of respects. But when it came to this thing in particular, what really bothered me was that if you're going to do that kind of thing, if you're going to go out there and bring a polling down to that low aspect, are you doing it for genuine reasons? And I think where a lot of people are coming from, myself included, is that it almost seems like it was almost a mob mentality to kind of jump on the film, not based on what the film was. And what's really important to me, I think, in the whole aspect is that people really see the film for what it is and try to separate it from all the other stuff that's surrounding it. And for me, when I heard that Rotten Tomatoes got rid of that function, I was actually cool with it, because I'm not actually a big fan of that kind of polling, because it can be manipulated in ways like we saw there. What do you think of my perspective in regards to that?
Well, yeah, like I said, it's funny because like I talked about before, when media started picking up on the fact that people were leaving negative reviews about whether they wanted to see the movie or not, the score itself wasn't that bad when it first started. Like I think when they were writing the reviews, or when they were writing the articles, the number was only like 72%, which is not like some like egregious number. It's not like it was 27% by the time they had started reading it. It was just people who were going on there saying they weren't interested in the movie, and they were basically citing, Brie Larson's comments. But the number at the time of the writing was only like 72%. When the media got a hold of it and they started writing their articles, I think what happened was that all the articles that were written about this from all the major outlets, they were basically calling everyone who had a negative opinion on the movie a troll, right? So you have to think about it like this. Here's a movie that's only about 72% interest, which is only like roughly 3/4 of people are interested in seeing the movie. You have a few people voicing their displeasure of the film, and then the media comes in and they start calling people who are voicing their displeasure trolls. So now the people who are already kind of upset to begin with are like, oh, okay, now they're calling us trolls. So I think after that, yeah, what you said was basically people started kind of latching on to the audience score, which at the time was only 72%, and it just started plummeting after that. And kind of after a while, I think what you noticed was like a lot of people, it just kind of became like, let's watch and see like how low this score is actually going to go. So you saw a lot of people like on YouTube who were like doing like daily play-by-play. It's like, oh, now it's at 36%, now it's at 30%. And, people just started kind of getting more angry. So I think, when the initial the initial complaints were like the few people who were complaining at first, I think those were like generally people who were like, hey, I didn't want to watch this movie because so-and-so said such and such. But then when it kind of became like a big media thing, that's when you have the people who were like, okay, we're just going to see how low this thing can go. And then that's when if there was any like malicious, intent behind the movie, that's where it would have started right there.
So essentially what we're saying here is that once the media kind of got onto this and started calling people who were not agreeing with the perspective or where the film was coming from, especially, say, the people associated with the film, that a lot of what was happening was almost like a protest vote.
Yeah, I think once the media got in, more people just kind of jumped on the bandwagon. It's like, oh, okay, so you guys are going to make a big deal out of like 70% of people, or like at the time it's like 30% of people said they weren't interested in it. And so then people just kind of like jumped on the thing. And like I said, I think you saw more of just like an overall protest of the film started building online at that point. So yeah, that's when, when the score started dropping, and then you started seeing a lot of people like giving it more coverage. And then by the time it got to a certain point, that's when Rotten Tomatoes stepped in and said, okay, we're not doing this anymore.
If it is a sort of a protest towards criticisms that the media have made towards people who made the initial made their initial response known towards Brie Larson and the filmmakers and Captain Marvel, doesn't that in the end though kind of come off as disingenuous? They're doing it for reasons which have been far more removed from the reasons that, say, a person like yourself had towards I mean, if we're going to go all the way back to Brie Larson's comments and then go to where we are now, do you think maybe the message has been muddled a bit in regards to the reaction towards this film? It has maybe become a thing where, well, the reaction to the film has become bigger than anything else, and maybe the core message within it as to why people were protesting in the first place has been lost here?
Yeah, I think like when the media stepped in, it sort of became like the movie itself kind of became like secondary at that point, because it was at that point there was a lot of people with the mindset of, okay, so they're going to call us trolls, so it's basically us versus them now. So it's like people who were feeling that, that okay, now you guys are going out of your way to like protect the movie and protect Brie Larson, so now we're going to basically make it like a cause out of this. And it's important to keep in mind that a lot of people up to that point, like even when the second the second interview that came out about Brie Larson, I didn't hear too many people, at least as far as like the bigger reviewers, going that okay, now that she said this, I have no interest in watching the movie. Like there were still people like willing to say, hey, look, I don't like what she's saying, but I'm still going to give it a chance because it's a Marvel movie, and Marvel usually has a good track record with these films and whatnot. But then when it kind of became like kind of a online battle between one side or another, you had people who kind of just like dug their heels in, and it was like it became bigger than the movie itself. And I think that was where the biggest problem was.
I've read this interesting tweet. I think it came up yesterday, maybe the day before. It's from Pat Sajak, who of course everyone knows is a popular game show host. And he was talking about how these days it seems like everything, especially movies, superhero movies, these things were supposed to be vehicles of entertainment, almost like live action cartoons have become so politicized that people can't just enjoy the mere thing of just watching a movie anymore. And I think with myself, I think what happened last year with Black Panther and the reaction that it had, which I think was totally organic, kind of like how a certain section of the American audience, the African American audience, really took to that film. And look, I'm a big fan of that movie, and I think the perspective that it came from was really unique in the whole kind of superhero genre movie. You don't really see much in the way of African American superheroes. Any ones I can think of prior to that was maybe Blade, when Wesley Snipes played him. I can't think of anyone else outside of that, though. Maybe you can correct me on that, Jacob. But I think what is happening now, especially from Marvel, is that they want to make every film some type of statement of some sort. And I think they pushed really hard, and maybe too hard, with the help of Brie Larson, in trying to make Captain Marvel seem like a perceived kind of big feminist kind of piece, which it isn't. But they're going to push that line anyway. Do you think maybe that's what's happening here? They saw what happened with Black Panther. They saw the financial, the critical, and the awards acclaim that it got from it, which a lot of people are saying, which is funny because if you're going to compare all the superhero movies of last year, I liked Black Panther, but it's going to come like maybe third or fourth in my list of favorite superhero films that was even released in 2018. A lot of people are going to say it got a lot of love because of its political stance or political commentary, and now they're going to try to push every film to do that. Do you think this is what's happening here?
Yeah, I believe that too, because like I said, what we were talking about earlier is like when it comes to entertainment, you have to understand that from top to bottom, outside of like a few sectors, like I said, it's really a majority left-wing run industry. You're talking about from the actors to the producers to the directors, studio heads, even the people who like nominate movies and stuff like that. Like they're all coming from a left-wing perspective. Now, I saw Black Panther 2. I liked it. But, I mean, if we're being completely honest here, Black Panther wasn't even the best Marvel movie that year. So the fact that got so many, Academy Award nominations, it was kind of ridiculous. But And I think a part of that was also due to the fact that, a few years ago, the Academy Awards got heat because there was no black actors nominated in like the major categories one year. So of course people started doing these hashtag campaigns and the online campaign saying that the Oscars are so white, and it got to a point where the people who were basically nominating these awards for the Academy, they completely cleared out the old guard essentially and brought in new people to vote in for the awards. So that's why you kind of saw a lot of movies, especially this year. I felt like there was a lot of movies that were nominated for Academy Awards that any other year probably never would have been. Like, I know, like, a lot of people were positive on Bohemian Rhapsody, and I was too, but I didn't nearly think that film was anywhere near one of the best films of the entire year. You had, like, other movies, which were, like, Vice, which was another big film that got nominations, obviously, because it was taking a lot of shots at the Bush administration during the early 2000s. You had movies like the Lady Gaga movie, which, I thought was a good film, but in its own perspective, it's like the fourth remake of this film in like the last like almost 100 years. So it's kind of hard to think, that hard about it. But as far as like, Black Panthers and other movies like this, it's like, yeah, I do believe that, certain films got nominated because they essentially, like Hollywood in a sense essentially wants to take the heat off of itself. It wants to take credit for stuff and also wants to take the heat off themselves as well. So they kind of think in their mind, well, if we nominate films like, Black Panther or Black Klansman, then they can't accuse us for being racist this year, right? Or if we nominate, Bohemian Rhapsody, they can't, accuse us of being, homophobic or not having enough, LGBT representation. If they nominate something like, like The Favorite and like one of these, but like basically they're trying to cover all of their bases with the nominations. And, a lot of it comes down to like, they wanted to show everyone like, how progressive the award ceremony has become, while also like getting the people, off their backs by saying that, hey, let's see, we'll nominate, Black people, we'll nominate gay people, we'll nominate women, that we don't have any kind of bias or anything like that, which I kind of felt was funny too, because, the film that won Best Picture this year was Green Book. And the Academy, everyone in Hollywood loved Green Book up until the point where they discovered that, I believe it was one of the writers of the film had said something positive about Trump like 3 years ago. Yeah. Then all of a sudden that film didn't deserve to win Best Picture anymore. So then when it won, there was more people upset about the film than not. But it was like one of the reasons why it was nominated in the first place, because it was a movie that was tackling race relations back, in the 1960s, which is like kind of like one of their like bread and butter. Well, if you do a movie about this, you're definitely getting nominated from the Academy. So it was kind of weird that even as hard as they tried to present themselves without any controversy, they still ended up getting it anyway. So
yeah, very true. I mean, the whole thing with the Green Book thing, I remember. Something that you and I went back on Twitter is that I made a comparison that a lot of the reaction from people on the left side of things, the Green Book, for me is very similar to what I'm seeing now towards Captain Marvel from the right side of it. It seemed, from my perspective, it seems a lot of people were putting biases before the quality of the product put forth. I know you and I talked a lot about that on Twitter, and we disagree on that. But I think something we can definitely agree is that it's kind of scary in regards to the reaction from a lot of big media people, especially social media, towards this kind of thing. You talked before in regards to Rotten Tomatoes, kind of like getting rid of the whole audience reaction thing. I think on YouTube especially, there's a lot of prevalent videos and such on there that is very critical of Captain Marvel. And from what I can gather, YouTube seem to be letting things through. I don't know if you have any opinion or any facts to dispute this. They seem to be okay with letting opinions go through there. I know there's a lot of channels and commentators and such find their stuff restricted on YouTube. Excuse me. When it comes to having conservative opinions towards anything, whether it's pop culture or what have you. I think though on Twitter, that when it comes to talking Captain Marvel, I think a lot of people are getting drowned out from other voices because in my opinion, Twitter is very much a playground more for kind of left voices than now for conservatives. There's been a lot of kind of shadow banning example over the last year or so. I don't know, Jacob, if you saw one of the latest Joe Rogan episodes where Tim Pool was on there alongside with Jack Dorsey and another member of the Twitter head office. They were going back and forth in regards to Twitter rules and censorship towards certain things. If you haven't seen it, if anyone out there hasn't seen it, it's such a fascinating discussion, a fascinating watch. It came up with a lot of things that people should be concerned with. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is when it comes to social media being in Silicon Valley, which is very kind of left-leaning, when it comes to Disney, which has proven itself with all the political campaigns its actors do, with Black Panther coming out last year, with the narrative to try and push this year with Disney, and when you add that to the fact that Disney are now purchasing Fox movies and they're going to have such a huge share of the entertainment market space, do you think it could be a chance that this Disney kind of machine going hop step with social media is going to be so big that no matter how justified a person's reaction towards an actor or a movie or whatever under the Disney banner, it's just going to be like throwing a rock at a tidal wave. There's no way you can stop it.
Yeah, that's one of my big concerns. Cause I've been like a very big critic of Disney, especially these last couple of years. To kind of backtrack just a little bit there, I think what you're seeing with YouTube, because YouTube and Twitter, there's two kind of different issues going on there at the same time, but they're pretty similar. With YouTube, I think this goes back to the 2016 election where Donald Trump won, and there weren't a whole lot of people leading up to that election, especially on the left, that actually thought Donald Trump was going to win. I think they believed that Hillary was going to win that election in a landslide. So when he won and she didn't win, there was kind of like this panic moment, especially in Silicon Valley. I'm not sure if you saw this video. It was probably like about a year ago when this dropped. It was Google, like the Google headquarters, and essentially you had them, I think like the day after the election, and there was a lot of like employees that worked there that were like emotionally distraught. And they were basically trying to figure out, how did this happen and how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? It kind of goes to show you like the bias of Silicon Valley, that you had so many people on the left that were so like disturbed by the fact that Trump won, and then they started looking at their own platforms and they were like, well, how do we make sure that, certain voices don't, get too much influence on our site? So what happened with YouTube was that YouTube, they started like silencing people. They started making, videos harder and harder to find. Like, so guys like, Gavin McInnes, Alex Jones, obviously, Laura Loomer, a few names like that. These people were either outright banned from the platform. They can't post anything on the platform, or they were so restricted to a point that, there was nothing that you couldn't find their videos even if you wanted to. And for the most part, when it comes to like the pop culture aspect of it, that's the political aspect of it. The pop culture aspect is that you don't really have, a huge like censorship wave going on for like channels like Geeks and Gamers, because Geeks and Gamers is one of the big channels that were covering the whole Brie Larson and Captain Marvel thing up until the point that the movie got released. I don't think they're really focusing on guys like that yet, because when you look at those type of movies that really evoke that kind of reaction throughout the media and social media, those only really come like 2, maybe 3 times a year. So it's not like there's a need right now to kind of like silence or censor certain voices like from the internet for a type of film that's only going to be seen like once or twice a year. But as far as the Twitter part of it goes, I think like when you were talking about the Tim Pool, and I did watch part of the Tim Pool thing. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I was essentially hearing them interviewing Jack and the lawyer. And one thing that I thought was very interesting that I don't think a lot of people caught up on is that when he called them out for policies that were leaning towards the left or favorable towards the left, I think the woman gave him a response saying that, well, we don't believe that these like policy or these rules have any kind of bias. And I think what he was saying was, I generally think that she believes that. But the problem is that when the rules that you're setting come from a biased perspective, it's like you may not think that they come with a bias, but say for example that what's the thing, dead naming, which they say, which is basically, if you have a transgender person who went from like male to female, so they used to be named like Rex, and now they're named Beth. Well, if you call them by their old name, their male name, even though they're still biologically a male, Twitter will consider that a violation of their rules, and they'll kick you off their platform for that. And the point that he was making is that, well, there's a lot of people out there, especially ideologically, that don't believe that just because you change your name to a woman's name, that doesn't mean that you're biologically a woman. So when you make a rule, when you set a rule on your platform that says, well, if you go against this, what we believe here, you can be banned from our platform, whether you consciously believe it or not, you're making a decision that's going to unfairly target a lot of people from one political ideology. That's why the majority of the people who have been banned or censored on Twitter over the years, the vast majority of them have been conservatives, because you're setting rules on your site that goes against their ideology directly. So when you set those type of rules, then it's no surprise that the majority of people who are going to be found guilty of that rule are going to be on one side of the aisle, because it's not going to be from the other side of the aisle, because the other side of the aisle agrees with the rules that you're setting. You know what I mean?
I think it's just such a fascinating subject, because when you look at it just from a distance, you're just seeing some reaction towards a superhero movie. But if you go into a little deeper, I think you really go into the weeds, you can really see some type of problems happening there. On my perspective, I like the movie. I think that some of the reaction from both sides of it has been overblown, but I also think that it's kind of troubling how, in regards to certain things, especially a social media component of it, there does seem to be a kind of, let's just say, I'm not going to say censoring, but something damn near close to it that could eventually lead to censoring down the line. I even read one senator, I forgot who it was, talking about how the American government should intervene in some sort to make this not happen again, which I just think is crazy.
I think that was some personality on like CNN or something like that. I don't think she was with government, but it was some TV personality that said that. But yeah,
but that's just nuts. That's just going to like a whole different level of just crazy right there. Which, I mean, for me, it's real simple. You have the movie, you have the fans. You can have the fans put up at whatever reaction they have towards it. In the end, the movie has to stand on its own two legs. And let's just be very frank here. Critically, financially especially, Captain Marvel is doing well for itself. So when Samuel Jackson says, I already cashed my check, I don't care what anyone says, he's pretty much right. He doesn't have to care what anyone says. He doesn't need to be a douche when he's saying it, but that's pretty much what's happening there. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen in the future with Disney releases, because I think because of the money that they make with their movies, and especially because of how much of the market share they're going to own in regards to entertainment content, they're going to be much more, I won't say the word brazen, but much more comfortable in pushing boundaries. And I think the film is going to do this, Jacob, and let's just mark it right here, there's a prediction on my part, is Frozen 2. There's been some question of whether a certain character in the film is going to be a girlfriend of one of, I think, who's the Ice Prince's name in the film? Is that Ella? I think it is. It's been such a while since I've seen that film. I think they're going to introduce a same-sex character in an animated film. And I'm going to be very interested to see what type of reaction, if any reaction, that's going to have, because Frozen is $1 billion film. Pretty much every family in the Western world has got in their collection because their kids watch it all the time. So I'm going to be very interested to see what type of reaction it has from, say, Christian groups or conservative groups up against social media. Whether, say, if you're a Christian conservative on Twitter who has a following and you put out a critical tweet towards a direction that Frozen 2 has taken, if my prediction is true, mind you, what type of reaction they have. Would there be bans? Would there be suspensions? Would there be a mob rule against it? I don't know. But I think when it comes to that film coming up, Jacob, that is definitely something we should keep an eye on. But until then, I thank you very much, Jacob, for taking time. We're clocking over almost over an hour now, and it's been a really informative discussion. I think it's really good that people talk about this stuff. They put it out there. Let's put all the facts on the table. Let's put our opinions on the table. And I think we've done a really good job with this. So thank you very much for joining me today, Jacob.
You're welcome. Hopefully enjoy it again.
And Jacob, before we leave, how about you tell the people out there, where can they find your stuff online, on Twitter, etc.?
I'm on Twitter at Society Reviews. My real name, Jacob Smith, is on there. You can also find me on my website, society-reviews.com. I'm on Minds currently. I'm on Letterboxd, so you can find something like if you just want, if you don't want the entertainment stuff and the more political stuff, if you just want pure movie reviews, I'm on Letterboxd. You can check me out there, and I think that's about all.
Excellent. For everyone out there, please do check me out at Matt's Movie Rev at Twitter. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast you can find on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and Soundcloud. Any reviews and 5 stars up there will be awesome. And until next time, Jacob, once again, I thank you very much for joining me. Until then, take care.